have to jot down the formulas on this and we're good to go.
All right. Our last section, 13.4, is about home ownership. Okay? And we're going to go through some terms you may or may not be familiar with to make sure that everything as we move forward does make sense from that. Okay? So the first description is something you should have seen before. You should have heard the phrase or word mortgage before. Have you? Okay. Mortgage just means the same thing as it did before. It's the amount you're financing, but it's the amount you're financing on a home. Call it a mortgage. Okay. Sometimes also called a deed of trust or a security deed. Okay. Down payment, again, is the same down payment that we talked about before. It's just that when we talk about it for homes, we're typically talking about a larger amount, but it's doing the same thing. It's the amount that we pay up front before we take out the loan for the remaining portion of it. And then the term is the time until the payoff of the mortgage. So does anybody know common term lengths for home mortgages? You heard before. 20 years sometimes. 30 years sometimes. And 15 years as well are common. 15 and 20 and 30 are the typical ones people do. Occasionally you hear about 10s. But 15 and 20 and 30 are the most common. Okay? And there's, of course, the amount of years of the mortgage. All right, the principal amount of the mortgage is the amount of the loan found by taking the purchase price minus the down payment. So that's the mortgage amount, the principal amount of the mortgage. Okay, it's the amount you're borrowing. A fixed rate mortgage, which is the one we're going to spend the majority of our time on, is the kind of mortgage that would most closely resemble the amounts or the formulas we've been working with the other loans. Okay, it's the one where the rate stays the same. And you might be saying, well, yeah, because that's the only kind we've talked about. That's not the only kind of mortgage loan there is, but that's the one we're going to spend most of our time working with here. So it's a fixed rate mortgage. And then amortizing is the process by which the initial principal balance, together with the interest on the loan, is repaid to the lender through regular periodic payments. Typically, you'll be getting, when you do this at some point, and most of you probably will, you go and you do all the closing and whatever, you'll get a table from whoever you're using your mortgage company. And on that table, it'll actually show every single month how much money is going towards the principal of your loan and how much of the money is going towards interest. And then if you have money being withheld for taxes or insurance, it'll actually show some of that too, depending on how the company sets it up. But typically we're looking at the amount of going towards the principal, that is how much less you actually really owe on the home, and how much is actually going towards just interest on the loan, that is your rent. It's the disappearing amount, right? In essence. Okay. So here's your first formula, and about the only formula I think we're going to have today. Yeah, I think so. This is how you find your regular monthly payment. So the regular monthly payment is based on the principal, that is the amount of money that you're borrowing. It's based on the interest rate you're borrowing the money at. Okay. Divided by 12, because we're going to actually look at the percentage per month we're paying when we're doing this. And then you'll see there's one other piece here, and that is, this is a plus sign, by the way. I know it doesn't look much like when it's not a T. This is really a plus. Here's your interest rate again occurring, and you see the T here, the time, and that's again still time in years. Okay? Time in years. Piece of cake. Now, there's a lot going on in this formula. The more simplifying you do in pieces, the less like your calculator is to spit back out at you something that makes no sense. All right, so just like on the other ones, order of operations issues, your calculator does not always do what you think it's supposed to be doing. So we're going to take a little bit of care as we do these pieces and make sure that it really does what we are expecting it to do. All right, the other piece here is the closing costs. Closing costs, and you've probably heard that phrase before as well. Closing costs is the amount of money that you pay when you actually take possession of that home, when you close on the home. It can include a lot of things. So it will include your down payment. Okay. It will often include, if you're rolling your insurance and your taxes into your mortgage, it'll include a portion where you're prepaying the interest. I'm sorry, not the interest. You're prepaying the property taxes and you're prepaying your insurance. It will involve potentially costs to a realtor if there's a realtor involved. It'll involve title closing costs. I mean, there's a lot of fees associated with it that just disappear into the wind as well. They're not going towards your actual purchase of the home. They're just a operating fee for having done business with somebody, okay? And there's lots of people you're doing business with, so that's why there's so many fees that are attached to it. There's the lending institution, there's the title company, which makes sure that it's you and you alone that owns the property and not somehow you mixed it up and now you own it with somebody else and that was not the plan or whatever, okay? Lots of different fees for closing costs. It also will include a certain amount of time lapse of interest. So you'll usually pay 2 months of interest up front as well or something like that. Again, the amount will depend on the lending institution. It also depends on the state you're in, on how they do their taxes. So I'll tell you, every time we've purchased a home, we've purchased 4 different homes, which I know I don't look old enough for that, but we've never lived very long in any one place either. Not a good plan, by the way, to purchase a home when you don't live there very long. But we have purchased 4 different homes in 3 different states, and every state has different regulations. And so it's just very interesting how they calculate things and how they work through this stuff. It doesn't always just flat out compute across the board different states. All right. We've got Ann and Andy again. I told you they were going to be your new best friends. Ann and Andy decide they're ready to buy a home. They find the perfect house. They negotiate with their realtor for a purchase price of $120,000. They qualify with their credit union for a $100,000 fixed rate loan with 3.75% interest rate on a 20-year schedule. That was a lot of detail. Okay, all in there in one fell swoop. And we're going to do pieces of this worked out again, just like on the last slides, okay? Question number 1 is, how much do they have to come up with for a down payment?
I already got that figured out.
So how do you find out what payment they have to come, or down payment they have to come up with, Leah?
The down payment has to be $20,000.
Okay, so hold tight with me then. You're correct. Can somebody tell me where Leah got $20,000? Where'd that come from? Right. That's the price of the property minus the amount that the credit union is willing to allow them to borrow, which is based on a lot of features. It's based on how worthy they think you are, how stable your job is, lots of things, okay? How much money you make, those kinds of things too. So if we take our purchase price, which was $120,000, and we take off the amount that we're able to borrow, then this is the minimum that we would need to pay at closing for the down payment. Again, remember, closing costs other things too, but this is the down payment portion that we would be responsible for in this situation. $20,000. So far, so good? Okay. Next question then asks you, what would their regular payment be? And that is the only new formula in this section, isn't it? It said capital R equals, so let's take a look. All right, so what was this formula? Do you guys remember? I don't have it written down again, so it's the principal, right? How much they're borrowing. Our interest rate divided by 12. And then we have 1 minus that same 12 divided by 12 plus R and raised to the 12t out here on the side. We're going to do our best to put in those values because you know all of them. What is P in this problem? Not $20,000. That was their down payment. $100,000. Right. Good. So that's the $100,000 that we're borrowing, right? P is always the amount that we're borrowing, or early on it was how much we were investing when we were talking about savings or accounts or things like that too. Now our interest rate was a funny one in this one. That is, it had lots of decimals, and that's okay. What is the interest rate in this problem? 3.75%. So what would that be as a decimal? Point what? 035. I'm sorry, 375. Right. We're going to take that, we're going to divide by 12. What that does in essence is it finds the individual monthly interest rate. That's why it's divided by 12 in that formula. And that's where you're seeing all the 12s come from too, by the way. And then we have 12 over. Now, on the denominator here, we're supposed to have 12 plus R. Well, we just found R, so I'm going to go ahead and write that as a value already added together. So it's 12.0375. Everybody good with that value? Understand where those pieces came from? And then I need 12 times t. What is t in this problem? The number of years of the loan, which was 20. So this is 12 times 20.
That would be 240.
Yes, and it's really important for us to go ahead and do that calculation for the same reason that it was early on when we were looking at compound interest. Your calculator will not do this part correctly if you flat out put it in from left to right, as it's appearing here. Okay? So we're going to figure out pieces of this before we move on. And the first piece I'd like for us to do is let's actually just simplify that numerator. We'll do the 12 times 20 in a second, but I'm going to start with the numerator. So if you take this, all in the numerator, you can figure all this piece out. Take 100,000, multiply it by 0.0375, and divide by 12. What do you have?
3.2.5.
And is that an exact value, Leah?
It is, in fact, an exact value.
Perfect. If it weren't an exact value, because it wouldn't have to be, you want to make sure you include lots of decimals until the very, very end, right? How many decimals did I say was lots? 6, 7, something like that, because otherwise you're going to have a rounding error somewhere. Here, we don't have to worry about it. It was a nice terminating decimal. All right, my denominator, I've got the 1 minus part here. So I'm going to leave the 1 minus for the moment. I want to deal with this piece right here. You guys already told me that this is 240, right? Agreed? What I would like for you to do is I'd like for you to do the part in parentheses here in your calculator. Take 12, divide it by 12.0375, and hit enter, and then raise it to the power of 240. Okay, so we're working on this piece all together, right there.
I put a snag here.
What's your snag? Is it an ugly decimal snag?
No, it's less than 1.
That's good. All right, so we have a value less than 1. What value do we have? Someone else, I saw Leah's already. Hers looks right. Somebody else tell me what you have. 29. What's after 29? I'm sorry.
19.
All right, 6 will work. Let's go with that. And then what are we going to do? Subtract. So do 1 minus that value. So I've got 312.5 on top.
Oh.
And now I have 0.5 something on bottom. What is it? With the same 6 decimals since we already stuck with 6 here. There's 1 minus 0.472919. Excellent. Then we're going to divide. 312.5 divided by 0.527081. That's our last step. We will get their monthly payment amount for the mortgage only.
$592.81.
And that's the first time we get to round to 2 decimals, right? At the very end. Okay, so they've got a $120,000 house in essence. They're going to pay about $600 a month to live there. Doesn't sound like a bad deal. Okay, so the catch is that's really not all they pay to live there. There are lots of other expenses that occur within home ownership. We're going to address those as well in a minute. But I want to do the table here and take a look. So I want to do a note. A conservative estimate for home ownership, and this is conservative, which means that doesn't mean you have to do it. But a conservative estimate is to take no more than a 15-year fixed-rate mortgage with 20% down that will cost you no more than 25% of your take-home pay. So, for instance, $600 a month sounds pretty good unless you find out that they only make $800 a month. Then we've got a problem. That's called being house poor. They're not going to go and do anything. They're going to stay in that house, and they're going to love it because that's all they can do. Okay? So it's all about ratios, right? It's only a good deal if it's not a lot of their personal money that's tied up in that particular purchase. And that's true for anything, right? I mean, we could do the same sort of analysis on how much of a car loan is reasonable. I would contend to say it's probably not a good idea at all. But obviously, you know, a $400 car payment is not good if you only make $700. Now you don't even have to, you're going to live in that car, right? We got problems. So again, it's all about ratios. So this is a conservative estimate on how to think about this as you're sort of gearing yourselves towards probably the next 10 years many of you will become homeowners, all right? So you're thinking about this. Don't strap yourself so tight that you can't afford to do anything else, all right? All right, so let's take a look at what an amortization schedule would look like. We're not going to do the 20 years for them. We're going to do 2 months. Because as you can imagine, if I did 20 years of this, and this is done every month, how many lines are in this amortization schedule? A lot. In fact, we know how many. 240. That was the 12 times 20 that we found a minute ago. This table, what they would get at closing, and they would give it to you at closing, would have 240 lines long of just exactly how much money every month, if they paid the entire thing off exactly as was described, that they would pay every month, how much would go towards interest and how much would go towards principal. Okay, it wouldn't vary. We're just going to do the first couple months so that you can see how it works. And it sort of has the same feel to it in some sense as that credit card one that you were asking about, Tara, earlier. Okay, it's going to have some of that same sort of feel to it. All right, so the first issue is you know how much the total payment was because we just found that. What is their payment every month? $592.89. So we already found that. We're just going to fill that already right on in this table. $592.89.
On both payment numbers?
You bet. Because it's not going to change from month to month how much we owe. Now, we could change physically from month to month how much we paid, but it has to be at least this amount, right? But the amortization schedule is going to assume that we pay exactly every month what we're owing. All right? So far, so good? That was an easy column, agreed? Okay. Interest payment. Now, that one's done a little bit differently, so we need some space to work. I'm going to do the month 1 down here at the bottom. So for month number 1, we need to find our interest. How do we find interest? Y'all know.
Uh-oh.
There's formula.
Principal times rate.
But what's the principal?
The principal, say again,
Times rate times time.
times the rate. Well, let me write it in here. Times the time.
That's one problem now. We don't know the principal.
We do know the principal. What's the principal? $100,000, because that's what they borrowed, right? We do know the principal. The very first month, it's $100,000. Now, that's going to change with month 2. But for right now, month 1, first time I'm making my payment, it's $100,000. So for month number 1, my principal is $100,000. What's my interest rate?
0.0375.
All right, 0.0375. Now, here's where things get fun. What's the time? It's not 1. Nope.
112.
It's 1/12. Where did 1/12 come from? This is a 1-month payment out of 12 months in a year, right? That's how much of a year we're paying this payment for, 1/12 of it. Okay, everybody good with that? All right, how much is this first interest payment? It's big, isn't it? What is it?
1250.
Payment number 1, I pay almost $600. Not quite, but almost $600 on my mortgage. But how much of it goes towards interest? Over half of it. And this 3.75 is a good interest rate. Do the same calculation just for the moment. I want somebody to do this number for me. I want you to run this at 7% instead. Okay, do the same thing for me. I'm going to double the interest rate. I mean, a little bit less than double, but double the interest rate. I want you to find 0.0375, take it out, put 0.07 in instead. What do you get?
583. 33 cents.
Did you see that? Now, that's not quite right because our actual regular monthly payment was also based on 3.75%, so it's slightly off. But what I wanted you to see that doubling your interest rate does not double something. Right? It doesn't work quite like that. This is a really big difference. All All right, so the majority of the amount you pay on any mortgage at the beginning of it is going to go towards interest. It's not going to look like it decreases very much very fast. Okay? Now, we can find the new principal payment, right? So the original principal was $100,000. We're spending $312.50 in interest.
Okay.
So how much is actually going of this amount towards principal? How could I find that?
Okay, I can subtract the total payment.
Yeah, so
from the
Leah,
interest.
hold for me just a second. Let's give someone else a chance. Austin, tell me what you want to subtract.
Subtract the interest from the total payment.
Okay, so we can subtract the interest amount, the $312.50, from our payment amount, right? Yes, we could. Perfect. All right, so I can find, this is still month one we're working on. Sorry, it disconnected. Let's give it a sec. There it is. All right, so the ones that you wanted to subtract, Austin, I think were the $592.89 minus $312, right? Yes. So this is going to find my second value that I'm looking at in my table. What? How much was it? So this is my principal payment. $280.39. I don't know about you, but I'm already discouraged, and this was a good interest rate. Half of the money disappeared. That was what it cost you to live there. That was in essence like what the rent would have been, right? Because that's what rent does too. Rent disappears. Okay, the interest is what disappears when you live somewhere, until the home's paid off, and then you're not paying interest anymore, of course. But for the interest, all right. Balance of principal. What do I do for that?
100,000 minus 280.
You got it. So the balance of the principal, the original principal was $100,000, right? But I paid $280 towards the principal, so I can subtract off that $280, and that will be my new principal.
To be precise.
So my new principal is $100,000, was the first principal, minus the $280.39. And what do I have for my new principal? I'll start out. It's 99,000 something. 719 and 61 cents. Okay. So now we owe 99,719.61. Month 2 does the same thing. However, for month 2, something changes. What
The
changes?
principal.
The principal changes. So the calculation will still look the same. All the calculations will look the same, but they'll get different values because I don't owe $100,000 in this house anymore. I mean, I almost owe it, but right. I owe $99,719.61. So for my new month, my month 2 now,
So the interest rate will change.
the interest rate won't change because it's a fixed rate mortgage. So the interest rate will stay the same, but the interest amount will change. Yes. All right. So we're going to take, this is our interest we're calculating right now, interest amount. It will be based on the $99,719.61. It will still have the same interest rate, which is 0.0375. And it will still have the 1/12 feature because it's still a monthly payment. 1 month we're calculating this only. So how much is the interest the second month? Life does get better, but not by a lot. How much is the interest the second month? So it's moving in the right direction anyway, agreed? I don't know as much as I did the month before. Let's finish this out real quick on this table, and then, of course, I know we're out of time. How do I find the principal payment then? How much money went towards principal? Subtract what? Yeah, I subtract the payment minus the interest, right? So $592.89 minus the $311.62. What was that? Is it 27 at the end? Okay. 281.27. We're almost done. 281.27. The balance and the principal. How do I find that? What's my new balance?
Your old balance
Yep.
and subtract the principal.
My old balance was $99,719.61, and we're going to subtract off the amount we paid towards principal, which was $281.27 for our new balance amount.
99,438.
And
So we're 2 months into this thing. We've paid $1,200, and it's not even gone down $1,000 yet, right?